All right, good evening, my friends, and welcome to Native Voices, a conversation with Virginia tribes. My name is Brent Roberts, and I'm the Dean of Greenwood Library. It's my pleasure to introduce Quincy Goodine, the Assistant Director of Longwood Multicultural Affairs, who will offer our land acknowledgement. Quincy?
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Okay. Like Dean Roberts said, my name is Quincy Goodine. I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. And I just want to read you a land acknowledgement, but I want to tell you why we created it. We thought that it would be important to not only do this to celebrate Native American Heritage Month, but also to recognize that long before Longwood was here, there were indigenous folks who cultivated and kept this land. And we need to pay those respects. So here's what we've created in our Office of Multicultural Affairs. We acknowledge that the land on which we sit and the areas that we occupy today are the traditional and ancestral home of the Monacan, Chiricahua, Nottoway, Meherrin, Tutelo, Sapani, Occaneechi, Sara, and Catawba tribes and nations. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering space and to this dialogue. We take this opportunity to thank and honor the original caretakers of this land and the many indigenous peoples still connected to it. Thank you and enjoy tonight's program.
Thank you, Quincy. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists this evening, Chief Brown and Dr. Brian Bates. Chief Walter David Red Hawk Brown III is the elected chief of the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Tribe of Southampton County, Virginia, and the chairman of the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Tribal Heritage Foundation. Chief Brown is a native of Southampton County and grew up on his family's farm, experiencing the age-old traditions and culture of Chiricahua Nottoway Indians by farming, raising hogs, fishing, hunting, trapping, and curing hides to sell with his father. Chief Brown proudly documents his family history back to the Chiricahua Nottoway Indians of the 18th century. Chief Brown has lived a life of service. He's a former elected official, having served on the Southampton County Board of Supervisors from 2004 to 2012. The first Native American ever to sit on the board since Southampton County separated from Isle of Wight County in 1749. Chief Brown is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, having served 28 years on active duty with many commands and leadership posts in the United States and overseas. He is a Vietnam and Desert Storm era veteran and has served extensive tours of duty in Germany, England, Greece, Italy, Turkey, Korea, and Okinawa, Japan. His early education began in a one-room country school in Southampton County, built in 1919 and set aside for people of color. Chief Brown went on to study at Norfolk State University, the University of Maryland, and the State University of New York, earning a bachelor's degree in social science in 1976. He also received a master's degree in logistics management from the Florida Institute of Technology in 1983. Chief Brown was first elected chief of the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Tribe in 2002 and has been a speaker in high demand on the ethnohistory and culture of his tribe. Chief Brown is also a minister at the Diamond Grove Baptist Church in Franklin, Virginia. He has 7 children. Our second panelist this evening is Dr. Brian Bates, professor of anthropology and archaeology here at Longwood University. Go Lancers. Whoop, whoop. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go. He's the director. He's the director of the Longwood Institute of Archaeology. He's conducted archaeological research in Virginia, the United Kingdom, and in the Caribbean. His research interests include prehistoric human settlement patterns, social hierarchy, and the interaction of human systems and environmental change. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in anthropology and political science from Longwood in 1992 Maybe maybe you didn't want me to say the year on that. That's fine, okay. And went on to receive his master's and PhD degrees from the University of London. Since 1997, Dr. Bates has conducted archaeological investigations at the Wade site located along the banks of the Stanton River at Stanton River Battlefield State Park, and we look forward to hearing more about that research with the Saponi tribe this evening. So first, we'll turn the time to Chief Brown to talk about the history and culture of the Nottoway, the Chirowanaca Nottoway tribe. Chief Brown, it's all yours.
Thank you so very much. It's actually a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation. And it's a pleasure meeting the panel at Longwood. I'm excited about what you're doing to expand and bring about the true history of Indigenous people here in the state of Virginia, especially what you're doing at Longwood. As the introduction has said, I am Chief Walt Red Hawk Brown. I am chief of the Chirowanaca Nottoway Indian tribe here in Southampton County, Virginia, and we are Iroquois speakers. As you're aware, there are 3 language groups in Virginia: Algonquin, Siouan, and Iroquois. We are Iroquois speakers. Okay, and I also speak the Iroquois language. We're very fortunate that in 1820, March the 4th, a former professor of mathematics at William and Mary College by the name of John Wood came to our reservation. At that time, it was 7,000 acres of land remaining out of the 41,000 that was granted to us by the House of Burgess in 1705. And he sat down with my 5th foster great-grandmother, Edith Turner. That is the name that was given to her by the colonials when they did the 1808 Chirowanaca Nottoway Indian census, but actually her native name was Wanerunsira. And she raised my 4th great-grandmother, whose name was Polly Woodson. On the census, her name was listed as Carol Hoot. So we have a rich recorded history on the Chirowanaca Nottoway Indian tribe here in Southampton County, Virginia. There are 425 people in the tribe that can document via a paper trail of their genealogy back to an ethnohistoric Chirowanaca Nottoway Indian tribe. Whether the name appears on the census that was done in 1820, March the 4th, or whether it appears on the 122 land deeds that verify the selling of the 41,000 acres of reservation land, which started in 1735, actually August 1735. The last piece disappeared in 1953 by the Sykes family, which was sold for taxes. But since that time, we've managed to acquire 263 acres, which is part of the 23,000 acre square tract. There were 2 tracts of land, a circle tract, which was 18,000 acres, and a square tract, which was 23,000. So we managed to reclaim by purchase in 2012, 100 acres, and then in 2016, another 163. So we have 263 acres of tribal land with 15 miles of walking trails, a beautiful 10-acre powwow ground that you can park at least 2,000 cars on it. We have walking trails with signage in our Iroquois language and also in English, identifying the flora and the fauna on our tribal land. Well, we have a very rich history. Even though originally we had our first ethnohistoric contact with the colonials in 1608 in what is now Nottoway County. Okay, if you look at the map of Captain John Smith, you would see the name Wayanoke. You would see the name not the name Nottoway, but you would see the name like Golyag, which meant snake. It meant enemy. Okay, because what had happened, the colonials when they first came here, they gave names to indigenous people, tribes, based on who they had first contact with, just like the name Nottoway. Nottoway is a very derogatory name for my people. Unfortunately, it has gone down into the annals of colonial history, but the true name of the Nottoway Indians is Chirowanaca. It means people at the fork of the stream. For where the Blackwater River and the Nottoway River, or those Chioki come together and form a fork where the Siouan joins the Siouan River. There were 3 villages that was identified by Edward Bland in 1650. When he came to what is now Fort Lee, Virginia, in Petersburg, and he came to this place called Homeville, where Highway 40 and 35 intersect in Sussex County. And he was a trader, and he was looking for the Tuscarora Indians, who were Tuscarora, who he said were a rich brown-skinned Indian that was bearded. So he met one of our chief men, whose name was Oyeker, granted Oyeker is Iroquois. And when the Alcomac Indians saw him, who were Algonquin, and they spoke the Algonquin language, they cried, Nottawa, 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 which in their language meant enemy. It meant snake. It meant adder. So the colonials picked up the word Nottawa and changed it to Nottoway. But the true name of the Nottoway Indians is Chirowanaca. Hakka. That is why when we solicited our petition for state recognition in 2005 at first, which was struck in February 2006 by Senator Louise Lucas, we resubmitted in 2010, and we were state recognized as the Chero and Hakka, parentheses, Nottoway Indian tribe of Southampton County, Virginia. So our learned colleagues would know that the true name of the Nottoway is Chero and Hakka. We're the only tribe in Virginia that ever had a successful court case against the Commonwealth. In 1848, there was a suit that was filed on behalf of the Chero and Hakka Nottoway Indian tribe and some of the Wyandots and some of the Pochac Nansemonds that were living on the reservation with us in the courts of chancery here in Southampton County. In 1851, Judge Rich Baker dropped the gavel and awarded my people $882.82 with interest going back to 1845. So we're the only tribe in Virginia that ever had a successful court case. And we say, if in the 19th century, sure, 1851 is the 19th century. If in the 19th century, the Commonwealth of Virginia recognized us as a tribe, and surely Southampton County is a part of Southampton County. Southampton County is a part of the federal government. So we say we are already federal recognized. And we have been pushing that now since 2002. Okay, and I'm gonna talk about it in a few minutes. So we're very fortunate that not only are we the only tribe of Virginia to have a successful court case, we're the only tribe of Virginia that ever had a documented special census. You know, the census was done 1790 every 10 years. In 2000, I was the director for Census 2000 and had congressional district, Virgil Goods, a congressional district, and also Norman Siskus congressional district, and had some 1,100 people working for me on the street, and I had 102 people in my office in Chesapeake, and I really got deeply involved in the census. And during my military career, I had 3 tours at Fort Lee, and I would always go to the Library of Virginia looking for history of my people. And whenever I go there, I could never find anything. So I went there in 1976 when I was at Fort Lee, and this lady said, "Well, have you ever looked under free Negroes and mulattoes?" I said, "No, because we're not free Negroes and mulattoes. We're Chero Hakka Nottoway. We're indigenous people." She said, "Wait a minute." She went back and brought out 3 boxes listed as free Negro and mulatto. And when I opened the first box, the first thing I saw was the 1808 Chero and Hakka Nottoway Indian census, and a census for 1819, and a census for 1820, and a census for 1821. But what was so amazing about that is that Billy Woodson, who was listed on the 1808 Chero and Hakka Nottoway Indian census here in Southampton County, Virginia, whose father was white by the name of William Bozeman, who the census says he was farming 11 acres of the reservation land. Evidently, history says he went to live with his father and he went and got this grandiose legal education and came back in 1821 and filed this legal brief with the Commonwealth, wherein all tribal people could come forward and claim their individual portion of the remaining 41,000 acres of the reservation land, providing they were in good standing with Virginia. So, and the reason why they did that was to get around the 1790 Non-Intercourse Act, which basically said, it was filed by the federal government, which basically said that no Indian could sell land to a colonial and no colonial could buy land from a Indian only if the federal government intervened, because the federal government had come to realize that the land was actually being taken. But getting back to Billy Woodson, AKA William Bozeman, in that census, the 1821 Free Negro Mulatto census, his name was listed first. He never went away anywhere and got any kind of education, okay? But this was the means by which the colonials used to actually have access to the land. That's why when they did the census, they only recorded 17 people living on the reservation. Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1820, there were 32. But they only recorded 17, and they coined this term matrilineal, that if your mother was an Indian, you were an Indian. If your mother was a slave, you were a slave, that old colonial mentality. So they only counted those female Indians that had children. However, they counted William Bozeman, AKA Billy Woodson, whose father was white. One of my ancestors, Tom Turner, who was living, as they said, cohabitating with a white person that had kids. They didn't count their children, okay? So it's amazing how that was done. And the reason why that was done was to give them more access of dealing with less people to actually get a deed certified for the land. So we have a very rich history. Census in 1808. I might add this first, I don't want to forget it. In 1728, William Bozeman II of Westover, who was involved in the dividing line between Virginia and North Carolina, a lot of you, my learned colleagues, is aware of the name. But anyway, he came to our reservation April the 7th, April the 8th, 1728. And he wrote a pictorial picture of how the tribal people looked and how our village looked. He said it was not square, it was not round, it was square, with 10-foot palisade poles leading outward so people couldn't scale it, okay? He described the long houses, the round houses, the Three Sisters Gardens, the hide stretchers, and also what we smoked fish on, okay? And then he wrote and said that when he first came, the women gave out hoops and hollers, woo, 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 and all the young men ran in the woods. This is what he wrote. I didn't write it, okay? I only read it and put it in my mind. But anyway, then he said the young men came out and their faces were painted. Of course, we call that medicine, okay? And they were dancing to the sound of a large gore drum stretched tight with an animal skin, singing in their Iroquois language and keeping step with their feet. First recorded powwow anywhere in Virginia, 1728, where Native people actually danced, and those outside of the Native community actually viewed that. Then he said the young women came out. He said they were tall but shapely, but anything in those days over 5'5" was tall for the English. He said their hair was braided and hung in locks on their shoulder. They had red and white conch shells in their hair and around their neck. But what was most interesting, he said, wrapped around their upper torso was a match coat. We know that it's a blanket today. That fitted loosely about their body, because when he came there, normally women would have one breast out because they were feeding kids. And he said that their mahogany skin shone through in special places. Then he wrote and said, though they be sad but colored, they would make exceptional wives for the English planters, and that their dark skin would bleach out in 2 generations. And a lot of that happened. There was a lot of amalgamation between indigenous people here in the state of Virginia, okay? Whether you accept that or not, but there was. That's where my green eyes come from. My mother, on her DNA, she was 90% indigenous American, okay? But we did a genealogy search, and we realized that her great-great-grandfather came here from England by the name of Jonathan Cutler. And his son fought in the War of 1812 by the name of William Cutler as a fifer in Blow's regiment. So genealogy is interesting. I've been out on a number of test digs. I'm also a life member of the Archaeological Society of Virginia. We have a hand site here, and we recently got a marker for it. If you've been to the tribal website, you'll see that. It took us 2 years to get it, dealing with the Department of Historical Resources, because in 1965, 66, and 69, 131 skeletal remains of our ancestors were dug up, and their bones were put in shoeboxes at the Smithsonian. We started working with the Smithsonian in 2005. We had our first visit. 15 years later, we are now able to get the skeletal remains back so we can reinter them on our tribal land so their spirits can walk easily. But it was a long process. It took us 15 years. Dr. Dorothy Lippert, who was one of the curators there, we met with her a number of times. The last time I went there, I took former governor, former Senator George Allen with me, and he had some points and stuff, and that's one of the reasons why we were able to get these skeletal remains back. But needless to say, we have a very rich recorded history. 95% of our history is recorded in the annals of colonial history. I mean, it's there just for the reading, but sometimes you have to read it with a fine-tooth comb, because people have a tendency to write. I don't care who you are, whether you're a professor, whomever, you write to the color of your own persuasiveness. So you have to fine-tune things when you read it, okay? So when I read the colonial, and I'm a historian, okay? Been a historian all my life, been deep in history, especially about indigenous people. When I was in the military, I became one of the first race relation discussion leaders trained out of Florida. We taught race relations on indigenous Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, colonial Americans, etc. So I have a long, deep desire for history, and the creator, Quaker Hunte, I thank him because he's given me this mind that once I read it, I got it. If I don't read it, I don't have it. Once I read it, if I hear it, I don't get it. But if I read it, for some reason, that stays with me, it goes to sleep with me, and I wake up with it, okay? So the history is rich. It is richly recorded. And in 2010, getting back to federal recognition, let me talk a little bit about that. In 2010, I coordinated with Congressman Moran, and when he left, I started coordinating with Congressman Whitman and Senator Tim Kaine and Congressman Bobby Scott trying to get attached to the Thomasine and Jordan bill for state recognition, based on our history, based on our documented history, based on our genealogy, based upon the successful court case, based upon the only Indigenous American census that was ever done in Southampton County. We had a conference call with 3 of their representatives, and the first question they asked me was, how do you think the other tribes will feel if you were added to this bill? I said, that's Mark Nix and irrelevant. They're Algonquin. One Siouan. I said, we're Iroquois. That's the last thing I heard anything about it. So when I went to the governor's first inauguration, Congressman Bobby Scott approached me and said, congratulations, Walt, on your federal recognition. I said, Congressman, we were not in that bill. And I explained to him our plight for 10 years, trying to get attached to that. And he said, well, the first thing you need to do is to get with the other 3 remaining state recognized tribes and do a consolidated bill the way the 6 tribes did. So I ran the gauntlet on that. The House switched from Republican to Democrat. So I reached out to Congressman McEachin. He agreed to run point. And for 2 years, we were told all the documentation, genealogy, history for all the 3 tribes were given to his office, to his legislative assistants. We were told it was submitted to the Committee on National Resources. There was nothing submitted. 2 years later, we get a letter from him telling us to go to the BIA because they had streamlined their policy. Yes, the BIA streamlined their policy, of which in 2013 and 2014, I provided comments to Mrs. Appel pertaining to Walter Plecker and how he negated tribal communities from 1912 to 1946 until his death, and how he wrote letters to every clerk of the court in Virginia in 1930 with names of indigenous people saying they were dressed bastards, quote, I'm quoting them, they were dressed bastards trying to be Indian so they could marry into the white race. So I talked with Mrs. Appel. I sent her comments on the 1934 showing that you had tribal autonomy in Virginia in 1934. We've added a comment to that. It said, so long as there has never been any government intervention to negate tribal autonomy. They didn't put that in there. So Senator Tim Kaine and Congressman McEachin, they looked at it. They really didn't read the 7 criteria because we can meet 6 of them. But we cannot meet that criteria that says to show your tribe existed as a tribal autonomy in 1934 because of the 1924 Racial Integrity Act, of which Walter Plecker promulgated, where he changed people's race. He even had Native people arrested in 1942 that signed up for the draft in World War II. He had them arrested. So evidently they didn't have the mindset on that. I hate to say that, but it's true. So now they said, go to the BIA. They didn't tell the other 6 tribes to do that. They were forced with the same problem. That's why they went to Congress. And then in his letter, he said, Congress does not know how to do that. It's amazing because he gave testimony and he co-sponsored the Thomasine Jordan bill that was pushed through Congress to President Trump that signed off on the federal recognition bill. So we say, we holler bias and prejudice. That's what we holler, okay? So a lot of people that know me know Chief Walt Red Hawk Brown. He speaks up front, he's very candid, and he tells it the way it is, okay, whether they accept it or not. So, but anyway, there is no other tribe in Virginia besides a Pamunkey that has the history, the documented history that we have. We were signatures on the 1646 treaty. We were signatures on the 1677 Whitman Plantation Treaty that took place in Williamsburg. Williamsburg was the capital. In our native tongue, we say Otio Koa, which means 2 wampums, okay? And also, we're the only tribe in Virginia that ever let a standalone treaty with the Crown of England, February 27, 1713, the Spotswood Treaty between Akura Ashtree here, who was our chief, who the white person called William Edmund. Each year during St. George's Day on April the 23rd, we give a treaty tribute of 3 hours wrapped in a beaver pelt with a wampum belt to the governor. No other tribe gives a treaty tribute. The Pamunkey and Mattaponi, they give a deer for taxes, okay? And on top of that, 1646, 1677 treaty tribute was 20 beaver pelts, never a deer. 20 beaver pelts because beaver was the cash crop. They could give a hoot less about a deer. But in the early 1920s, the Pamunkey and Mattaponi started doing a deer for taxes, which is good. That's part of their tradition and history. Our tradition and history is that we do the treaty tribute, and we have been doing that. It has been accepted, okay? This year we did the 308 treaty tribute of the Spotswood Treaty. Each year we write a letter to the Queen of England inviting her. She sends a letter back telling us that she cannot come, but I will write the governor of Virginia and let them know that we support that. 41,000 acres of reservation land disappeared. I have copies of all 122 deeds. And if you go to the Library of Virginia, there are 6 journals that I have authored, okay? It's called the Vaskahi. Vaskahi means to see in our language. In Issue 5, you will see 3 of the transcribed deeds, okay, which started in 1735. Originally, you could only buy 500 acres a day. They were selling 3,000 and 4,000. When you look at that Vaskahi, you will actually see the marks the chief men made on the first deed. Every other deed after that, which was penned by the scribes, there are different marks. We all know that chief men don't change their marks. We don't change our signature, not that much. But that's just another Paul Harvey, okay? That's another Paul Harvey associated with the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian tribe of Southampton County, Virginia. I would recommend that those of you that are listening on the Zoom, that you go to the website, you click on the scroll down bar, you click on tribal history, and you look at the ethnohistoric snapshot from the last enter was in December 2020. It takes you from 700 AD to the current time. It is in bulletized format, easy to read, short sentences, okay? But it's a wealth of true history there, of which 95% in the annual of colonial history. Again, we are the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian tribe of Southampton County, Virginia. We're Iroquois speakers. We have our language. We do a spoken language word a week to our tribal kids and adults every year, teaching them every week, teaching them the language, because we believe that if you lose your language, you lose your culture. If you lose your culture, you lose your traditions. And we're trying to keep our culture, and we're trying to keep our traditions. I'd like to extend the invitation to all of you to our 28 Corn Harvest Intertribal Powwow, which takes place on our 263 acres of tribal land at Catasauqua Town in Southampton County, Virginia, on November the 5th, 6th, and the 7th. November the 5th is a school day. We do a school day every year with the exception of 2020 because of the pandemic. And the powwow is November the 6th and the 7th. We bring in the Aztec dancers out of New Mexico. They dance for the fire ceremony. Over the last 10 years, it has turned to an international tourist attraction. We've had people from Japan, from Korea, from Germany, from England, from Australia, from Vietnam, Puerto Rico, okay? Matter of fact, a few years ago, we had 7 visitors from England, from London, England, that came and presented us a plaque from the Mayor of London. So we bring in tourist dollars to Southampton County and the surrounding areas, because when tourists come, they eat in the restaurants and they live in the hotel. Any kind of local event you have for local people, it's not tourists because they don't spend any money, okay? So our event now has become an international tourist event where people are coming and wanting to learn the latest history. And I also give a 45-minute presentation at every powwow, Saturday and Sunday, and I also give it on our school day, which will be Friday, November 5th, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So 263 acres of what used to be 41,000 acres of reservation land. We're kind of happy with that. At least I am, because in 2002, when I became the chief, not patting myself on the back, which I am, we had nothing. We had no water, we had no land, we had no well, we had no tribal kitchen, we had no walking trails, we had no powwow ground. Matter of fact, the first 4 years we were doing our powwow at the fairground. So the Creator has really blessed us. He's given us a lot of favor, of which we thank him dearly. And that's one of the first things that we do at our powwow. We invoke the aid of deity and thank him for his favor, because his favor is still coming. I might also add that we developed plans in 2010, and we got with 3 architects, and they gave us 3 plans for Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Museum and Culture Center, a non-denominational worship center, and a wellness center. In 2012, the Tribal Council voted on one of those plans. We are hoping that in June of 2022, we can break ground, because the Creator has also given us favor. On September 18, 2018, we initiated a Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Enterprises, LLC, and the Creator blessed us that in April the 29th of 2021, we were sanctioned as an SBA 8A sole source entity. wherein we can bid sole source on millions of dollars in government contracts. And the Creator has been blessing us on that. We now own a construction company. As the president of the company, I've already let my vision to do an IT business unit also. So as soon as the money starts coming in, of course, we got to play out with investors first, because there's a lot of money that investors put up front. We get 51% of the profit and the investor gets 49. So the Creator is blessing us, and we're looking forward to having that Culture Center museum put up. We have some 3,500 artifacts. Can you see this? Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, this was found on our tribal land. Also, not too far away, at an archaeological dig at Cactus Hill, there was a Clovis point found, dates back 18,000 years. So it shows you how long we have been here in the Southampton County area, okay? Long before they say Columbus came here, Columbus never set foot on these Americas. The Vikings may have. But long before any colonials came here, we were here. We've always been here. The hand site based on DNA, based on DNA of artifacts that were found, it dates back to 700 AD. So it shows you how long we have been here in the state of Virginia and how long we've been in Southampton County. So we say, I was the first one to coin this phrase in 2002. We are here and we are still here, and we will always be here. I'm Chief Walt Red Hawk Brown of the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Tribe, and I am so thankful that you allowed me to come in and give you bits and pieces of the history of the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Tribe and tell you how excited I am to be a part of this venue here, okay, with Longwood University. You guys are doing great things. The panel has done great things to pull this together. And I am hoping that some of your students will get involved in Indigenous people history, especially Indigenous tribes here in Virginia. We got involved in Virginia Tech some years ago, and they started a museum there. Matter of fact, our tribal flag is hanging in that museum now. I had a chance to go there and be a part of their speaking engagements when they open up the museum. And I might add, ever since 2002, we have been doing, it was kind of mentioned briefly in the introduction, we have been doing Native American presentations in every military installation at Hampton Roads, to include on the Hill in Washington, D.C., to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to the Hill in Richmond, Virginia, to include setting up powwows and speaking engagement at Old Dominion University, Norfolk State University, Southside Community College in Alberta, Virginia, powwows in Nottoway County, where we first had ethnohistoric snapshot. And I might add that the first contact we had with the colonials in 1608 was at a place called Tomahiton. If you ever travel down Highway 40, once you get into Nottoway County, you will cross this little branch. It says Tomahiton Creek. We had a campsite there when colonials, Captain Catskill, came out of what is now Fort Lee, Virginia, looking for answers and information pertaining to the lost colony. So they asked us about it. Of course, we denied anything about it because we could have been shot on sight. But however, our oral history always said that we were there on the saving mission. It was not a massacre, okay? Because the Catawba Indians, the colonials actually amalgamated with the Catawba Indians, okay? That's why you see so many green-eyed, blue-eyed Catawba Indians now, okay? And more than that, when they did the archaeological dig in 1965, 66, and 69, dates back to 1585, okay? There was a colonial lady in her late 20s who was dug up. In her grave was her sewing scissors and other artifacts related to her. That person, we believe, was a member of the lost colony that came back with us, whether she was kidnapped or whether she was on a saving mission, but she was there and she was buried there on that hand site. It's 4NHN22. You can go to the website, you can see it, and you can see the history. It basically says this site was long claimed by the Chiricahua Nottoway Indians here in Southampton County, Virginia. It took us 2 years working with the Department of Historical Resources, documenting that, because we had to prove to them that the true name of the Nottoway was Chiricahua. It first appears in the wallpapers of 1796. It appears in the history that Louis Benford wrote, okay, on the Chiricahua Nottoway Indians, the Meharry and Owano. It appears in the papers of James Trasvant, who was one of the presiding judges on the Nat Turner trial, who did a second recording of our language in 1831 to 1836. So we kind of wonder, well, how did he do a second recording of our language, which actually marries the language that John Wood did out of William and Mary. So we come to realize that his wife was Tuscarora and Cherokee. That's how he was able to do a second recording of that language. So our history is rich, and you can't deny it because the colonials wrote it, okay? But we still say this: true history needs to be written by Native people. They need to write their own history so they can share their story, okay? We need to share our story, and we tell everybody that at our powwows. And our powwows are intertribal. Our drum this time is our Cherokee, which is Medicine Horse Singers, okay? And we share that when we do our presentation. You need to write and document your own history because you're the best storytellers, okay? And when you read colonial history, you read it with a fine-tooth comb because everything you read in the black and white in the newspaper is not necessarily true, and we all know that. But I'm so glad that we have some great learned colleagues at Longwood University that's deeply involved in the annals of colonial history and can weed out those things. They can separate those things out that are not true. But we're still here. And again, I want to thank you. I'm Chief Walt Red Hawk Brown of the Chiricahua Nottoway Indian Tribe, and we are Iroquois speakers. And I say to you, Osio, Bakwata Santa Iniho. Osio, Bakwata Santa Ikiye. Hello and good evening, man. Hello and good evening, woman. Kwekahante, Isanti, Vaskahi, Creator, my heart speaks. Kwekahante, Isanti, Vasvika, Creator, my heart sees. Kwekahante, Isanti, Tarahanta, my heart hears, and it hears, and it hears. That's the only way we can make it right. We have to listen, and then we have to speak. Bakwats, Santi Tong, Vasvika, Creator, my heart has spoken. And thank you so very much. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but we'll open it up for questions and answers. I'm quite sure you have a million. I hope you do. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Chief Brown. We will, I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to set up the presentation space for Dr. Bates right now, and then we will hear his comments, and then we will open it up for general questions.
Oh, thank you. Is there any way we can zoom in on so we can see him when he's speaking?
Chief Brown, I'm going to be doing a slide presentation, and they're a whole lot better to look at than I am. But when the slide presentation is over, I'll get on camera.
I got it.
Can you hear me okay on Zoom?
I can hear you fine.
Excellent. I am very pleased to be with you all this evening, and I would like to share a little bit about archaeology and how archaeology can help lend some voice to the Native American story. I'm going to do this through the research that I've done at a site about 50 miles south of here on the Stanton River called the Wade site. The Wade site, located on the banks of the Stanton River near the little hamlet of Randolph, Charlotte County, has been the subject of archaeological investigations by Longwood University for about 25 years. It is what a very good friend of mine, who was the former state archaeologist of Virginia, refers to as the longest running continuous archaeological investigation in the Commonwealth of Virginia that is not associated with some dead white guy. Monticello, dead white guy. Mount Vernon, dead white guy. Wade site, not dead white guys. And it is because we've been a continuous project for so long that we have a much more deep and rich story to tell about life along the banks of the Stanton River. The site is what archaeologists call a deeply stratified site. That is to say, there are very deep deposits below the plow zone that have not been harmed by agricultural activities or other kinds of activities. When it was occupied by the Saponi Indians, from about 950 to about 1425 AD, we know that it was an island. We know this because geology professor, Dr. Joe Garcia, working with undergraduates in his program and my program, did test to demonstrate that it was in fact an island. That becomes important in our story in just a little bit. The Wade site is a wonderful place to teach people how to do archaeology. The site is situated in a beautiful floodplain. It's a wonderful place to be in the summertime. It's on the banks of the Stanton River. And over the last 25 years, we've opened up about 1,500 square meters of excavation area, which accounts for about 4% of the total area of the site. Archaeology is an inherently human endeavor. It's human on a bunch of different levels. It's human because we've got a bunch of folks out there doing something. The something that they're doing is trying to find data that can inform us about other humans. And we always try to reinforce those connections for my students. And sometimes my students are 20-year-olds, and sometimes they're this little guy. This is my son, who did his first excavation at the Wade site when he was about a year old. And he's come back every year since. He's now 8. And whenever the spring rolls around, he starts asking me, Papa, can I go dig at the Wade site? So I like to think that I'm trying to bring him up right. When we're looking at an archaeological project, we're looking at the evidence that people have left behind, and we are recording it in very particular ways that are useful in archaeology to decipher the human story. And so we spend a lot of time recording things. In this photograph, I'm demonstrating both an old-fashioned way using those square drawing frames and pencils and paper, and a modern way using a total station and a computer to record data in detailed ways that can help us to start picking apart the data and understanding it in ways that will be meaningful in discerning culture. The batteries on your computer might die, but so long as you got lead in the pencil and paper on the board, you can continue to do research. And that's what I try to impress upon my students with work like this. Now, at the Wade site, we have been finding a variety of evidence about life in the prehistoric past. And I'm going to break it down into a couple of categories. First, we have lithics. Those are materials that are made of stone. And one of the interesting things is, whilst the Wade site was occupied for about 500 years, beginning at about 940 or 950 AD, we have evidence that Native Americans were passing through this region and staying at the banks of the Stanton River, at least temporarily, going back thousands of years. The earliest artifacts that we have from the vicinity of the site are projectile points that date back to about 7,400 BC. So we know that this was an attractive region. The Stanton River was rich in resources, and it would have been an attractive place for all Native peoples to go. But at the site itself, the actual habitation of the site, we find the kinds of stone points, projectile points, that are consistent with bow and arrow hunting and defensive technology. So we find projectile points like Caraway points, Clarksville points, these points, which are made in stone at the Wade site. At later contact period sites, they make the same shape artifact, but they're making it out of metal. So we see that they'll maintain their tradition of an arrow point, but they'll change the raw material as materials become more evident or available for them. So we're finding the kinds of stone artifacts that we would expect to find at a site that was occupied for an extended period of time in the late woodland period. The next class of data that we find at the Wade site in abundance are ceramics. Fired clay pottery. The scale of this is a little bit difficult to see, but the scale on the side is in centimeters. So this is a moderate sized pot, about the size of a quart and a half. But we find them much larger, about the size of a 5-gallon bucket. The type of pottery can tell you a little bit about the culture of people. People living in the same culture area tend to make artifacts of similar styles, and those styles will change over time as culture changes. The type of pottery that we're finding at the Wade site is called Dan River ware pottery. And the Dan River pottery is common in the southern Piedmont of Virginia and the northern Piedmont of North Carolina, in an area about 125 miles east to west by about 50 or 60 miles north to south. That kind of area at about 1000 AD would have been where this type of pottery would have been commonly made and used. Sometimes the pottery has decorations on it, like these little chevron designs with a hole pierced in this one. Sometimes we have zigzags and crosshatches. We don't know exactly what the designs mean, but they could be telling us something about clans or lineages. People from a certain family lineage may be making pottery, and in some of the pottery marking it or branding it with a design that would be recognized as being from their family lineage. That's one interpretation of what these mean. We also are finding pipes. Pipes are, some of these are very ornately decorated, like this one. Some are a little bit more plain, but pipes give us an interesting insight into a technology. If you have pipes, you are smoking things. Some of the things you might find naturally, but some of them you may be cultivating. And so the presence of pipes on this site are indirect evidence, we believe, for the cultivation of tobacco, which would be something we would expect to find in this area at around 900 or 1000 AD. But as I'll show in just a little bit, there are some pipe shapes that can tell us more about trade and exchange, and we're finding these at the Wade site. When we first discovered the Wade site in 1997, one of the things that stood out was the organic preservation, organic things that were once living. And so we find a lot of tools and animal refuse at this site, which is fairly uncommon in the southern Piedmont. Typically, you have Virginia red clay. That red clay is very acidic, and organics don't preserve well in that kind of soil. But at the Wade site, it's a well-drained alluvial soil. It's fairly neutral in its acidity, and so we can find organic materials. That's really important because whilst you can find stone tools and clay artifacts on many prehistoric sites, the actual majority of the material culture of a people tends to be made out of the things that are inorganic, or excuse me, that are organic. And so when you can find organic things preserved, you get a much more rich picture of what life was like. And so we find things like these deer toe deer toe projectile points. These are the hoof of a deer. The hoof material attaches actually to the bone. The bone has been hollowed out of the backside and would be hafted onto an arrow used in place of a stone tool. So these are actually arrowheads. We find deer elements. These are all deer leg bones, ulna, and tibia that have been processed into pointed objects, most likely awls for processing animal hide to make clothing. You punch a hole and then you can stitch them together. We find an abundance of fish hooks on this site. Now, fish hooks to me are a really interesting artifact. They're interesting because when a freshman Longwood student working on the site finds a fish hook, it's an artifact that they can immediately identify with. Most people have gone fishing at some point in their life, and so they find this thing and it immediately provides some kind of connection. But more than that, a fish hook tells me something about what life was like 1,000 years ago on the banks of the Stanton River. You're not going to, we believe that the village, when it was at its height, probably had around 150 to 200 people living at it. Population estimates are always a little bit difficult to pin down exactly, but that's I think, a fair number. You're not going to feed a village of people with fish hooks. You're going to fish for a large scale with fishing nets, and we have evidence of fishing nets by net impressed pottery. So the fact that we're seeing fish hooks at this site suggests to me that there is a surplus, an abundance of food, and people can fish for leisure. You could feed a family with fish hooks, but you're not going to feed a village with fish hooks. You're going to do leisure, more recreation oriented, and I think it suggests to us that life along the banks of the Stanton River 1,000 years ago was pretty good in the sense that they had their food, basic subsistence logistics nailed down pretty good. And that's one thing that I'm gleaning from fish hooks. Turtle shells are abundant at this site, suggesting that not only were people eating turtles, but they're processing the shells. And this one, the muscle or the skeletal attachments on the inside have been abraded almost to smooth to utilize this turtle shell as a cup. So the reptile is providing a food resource. It's also providing a tool. And we know that the turtle is a fairly significant feature of many Native American supernatural belief systems. So there's multiple layers to the fact that turtles are being utilized on this site. We're finding ornamentation. These are pendants made out of bone. These are also pendants made out of bone. And we even have some, these are dog canines that are pendants as well. Now, over the years, it was originally my plan to work at the Wade site for between 3 and 5 years. And if I had left after 5 years, my interpretation of what life was like would have been fundamentally different and absolutely wrong. So this extended longitudinal study has provided evidence for an emergence of a chiefdom at the site that was indicative of what's going on in the region. What is the evidence? The first piece of evidence is maize cultivation. This is a photograph from 2017 of a hearth that we excavated. And whilst it's washed out in the room here because of the lights, on the screen, there is a bunch of charred wood, but embedded in that charred wood are probably 3 dozen corn cobs. Now, these aren't corn cobs like you're going to get down at the food line that are about a foot long rather. These are maybe 4 to 6 inches long, and they're a little bit skinnier than what we would think of. But this is a species called Zea maize, which is the original corn species that was brought into the Mid-Atlantic from the further southeast. We also have acorns in here that are charred, and we have some hickory nuts that are also charred. The presence of corn, which we had always suspected they were growing, there's no reason why they shouldn't have been growing it, but we actually can demonstrate it now. Corn is one of those key food resources that allows population to expand. Once you can grow a surplus of food and then store it for a long period of time, you're not just living day to day, you can plan out entire years based on the surplus that you can produce. Once you have food surplus, population tends to expand. And as population tends to expand, we see social hierarchy become more complex. We see a move from big man social organization to a chiefdom. And I believe that the corn is the first piece of the puzzle that suggests to me that we have an emerging chiefdom because they got the food covered. The next thing that indicates to me that there is a chiefdom emerging at this time is a series of features that we found in the center of the site. These features are very large stone-lined post features, which in this image, there are 3 of them. There's one on the left, one in the center, and one on the right. They are about a meter wide by about 1.5 meters deep. What they represent are large holes that were excavated in the ground. Then a big post was set into that hole, and packing stones were packed around it to hold that post upright. Now, this post was pretty massive. It's probably about 30 inches in diameter. So these are pretty big pieces of wood. This is the photo of it, and next to it is the drawing. So that is the post features in section, and that's them looking down on above in plan view. To my knowledge, and I've done a lot of research since we first found these, I cannot find any other archaeological evidence for these types of features in Virginia, but I can find evidence for it in places farther afield. If you go about 200 miles south of the Wade site into North Carolina, at a place called Mount Gilead, you would come to a place called Town Creek Indian Mound. Town Creek was a Mississippian affiliated culture that is a palisaded village. It's on a river. It's got an earthen mound on it. And it was the subject of some excavations for a number of decades by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill under renowned archaeologist Geoffrey Coe. Coe demonstrated at Town Creek that there was a central post marking the center of the village, symbolically marking the center of the universe to the people who lived at Town Creek. He also demonstrated that periodically the post would be taken out and another post would be put in its place. My suspicion is that what I'm seeing at the Wade site is a borrowing of a Mississippian idea that came up from the south, and that rather than having a post that's replaced, they have 3 generations of a post. When one rots and becomes no longer useful, they put one right next to it. That's a working hypothesis I have, but it suggests that the people who are living at the Wade site are in an intellectual exchange as well as a commercial exchange with Mississippian cultures further to the south and to the west. And then this semester, I have 3 undergraduate students working with me on 3 different research projects related to the Wade site. One of those students, Quinn Urban, is looking at the tobacco pipes that we have from this site. I sent a picture of some of these pipes to Dr. Dennis Blanton, a colleague at James Madison and an expert in Mississippian cultures. And this pipe in particular, although others that we have in the assemblage, he's very confident that we're looking at Middle Mississippian era pipes that date to between about 1200 and 1375. But in his estimation, this is the northernmost example that he's ever seen at Charlotte County. He's not seeing any of them this far north. So this is another potential indication of a Mississippian cultural exchange happening at the Wade site, which is something that we would expect to see in a chiefdom. Then there are the shell artifacts. These are what are called marginella beads. We find these all over the site, sometimes just scattered on the ground in various places, sometimes in features. But these are little shells that have a hole ground into them, and then you can then put a piece of cordage through it and come out the natural opening, and you can stitch them onto clothing or make a necklace out of them. These are a marine species. They're a saltwater species. So they're coming from somewhere at some distance. If you were to hop in the Stanton River in a canoe and go downriver to the ocean, if you took out Kerr Reservoir and you took out Lake Gaston, it's about 230 miles downriver to Albemarle Sound, which would get you to the ocean. So that's probably the quickest trade route for these things, but they could be coming overland as well. We're finding shell like this, another marine species that's been made into a bead. We have a bunch of what are called columella beads. These are made from marine shellfish species where they knock off the outside and they just use the central column of them. And then we have this one. I worked very closely with Chief Otis Martin and the Saponi Tribal Council to do some analysis on this particular shell artifact. This artifact is made from a species of shell called Buzicon. Generic name is a whelk. It's about the size of the palm of my hand. We took it to the University of Georgia's Center for Applied Isotopic Studies to tell me where that shellfish lived its life before it was harvested and turned into an artifact. I was expecting the coastal waters of North Carolina or perhaps the Chesapeake Bay. What we found was that this shellfish lived its life in the Gulf of Mexico. That is a good 1,800 miles from the Wade site, which suggests to me that this artifact is part of a very elaborate trade and exchange network through the Southeast that's bringing these ideas up to the Wade site. And is another piece of evidence, I believe, to suggest that we have a rather complex chiefdom fully emerging by the time the Wade site occupation ends at about 1425. Now, so far, I've been talking about things. And I need to point out that archaeology is not about things. Archaeology is about people. It's about telling a human story. And I oftentimes refer my students to a quote. The quote comes from Black Elk, as reported to us by John G. Nyhard in his book, Black Elk Speaks, written in 1932 and published many times since then. At the end of the book, Black Elk takes a party to a particular place where he had a vision as a young man in the middle 19th century. And now near the end of his life, Black Elk is seeking to get the spirit world to help him. And this is the final quote from the book. "In sorrow, I am sending a feeble voice, O six powers of the world. Hear me in my sorrow, for I may never call again. Oh, make my people live." And I try to impress upon my students that as archaeologists, we're not interested in things. We're interested in human beings who may not be able to tell their own story anymore. And that our job through the data that we collect is to make their lives, to make their people live once more, to give voice to these native populations who are no longer, the people at the Wade site are no longer here. So we're trying to tell their story for the benefit of their descendants. And it is to those people that I owe a great debt of thanks. Chief Otis Martin and the Saponi tribe have been wonderful partners for the last 25 years, as have been Virginia State Parks. The Wade site sits on a state park, and the Department of Historic Resources, who have all been wonderful partners to work with. And so with that, I will offer that archaeology, if in my estimation it's done correctly, should be done to give voice to the people that we are studying. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bates. Now, Dr. Bates is going to lead a conversation and we'll open it up to questions. And I'll fire up the chat to see if we have questions from our viewers on Zoom.
When
So
you get the opportunity, this is Chief Brown. I have a couple of questions for the good doctor in reference to the Wade site.
Sure.
Okay. And what I want to do is that, I don't know if he's familiar with the hand site.
Yes, sir.
That Dr. Joel Smith did his thesis on 1965, 66, and 69.
Yes, sir.
I'm holding it in my hand now, okay? That's what I'm holding. And I want to show you a few things. I want you to look at these pipes, okay? It's the same pipes that you showed at the Wade site.
Yep.
You have to remember that there was a lot of trading going on between indigenous Americans, okay? Now this site dates back to 700 AD.
Mhm.
But 132 skeletal remains were dug up.
Yep.
My question is, there were a lot of artifacts that were found also. My question is, you had mentioned that area that had rocks around it for a post hole.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that the only post hole that you discovered?
Yes, sir. On that site, those 3 post holes are really the only amount of substantial stone found on the site.
Okay, I want to show you something with the hand site, okay? I don't know if you can see this or not. You see this diagram here with these are the post holes that were discovered, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's a group of houses here at the hand site. You see them?
I do.
Can you see them? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Over
Mhm.
here. Okay, that whole village and how they documented exactly where the village was, that was basically a square, where they did the archaeological dig was based on the discoloration of the soil that was round.
Yep.
And they did a circumference on it to decide to determine and did the diagram exactly the size of the village and where it was located, okay?
Yep.
We also did the same thing in reference to the burial areas where all the skeletal remains were buried. I don't know if you can see that or not. Can you see that?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
And I wanted to show you something here because there was a lot of trading going on. And I've been a member of the Archaeological Society of Virginia since 2002. Actually, I'm a life member and I've been out on numerous test digs, okay? I wanna
You and
show
me
one
both.
more- Yeah, I know, but I want to show you one more thing. And also while I'm looking at this, I'd like to add that in the Executive Journal to the Colonial Council of Virginia, there are 6 volumes, 1680 to 1775, which is actually a facsimile of all the minutes that the Colonial Council recorded based on their interactions with indigenous Americans in Virginia. In 1715, 1716, Alexander Spotswood found that now in Brunswick County, Christiana, Fort Christiana, because what he was doing was war had broken out, and he wanted to make sure that none of the tributary Indians would go across the line in North Carolina and join the Tuscarora and fight against the Colonials. So what he did, he created this act wherein all tributary Indians, the Maharian and the Cherokee, the Saponi and the Occaneechi would come to Fort Christiana. Because just prior to that in 1696, as you're aware, if you read Bacon's Rebellion, supposedly there was a massacre that took place at Occaneechi Island, okay?
Yep.
That all of the Occaneechi Indians were killed, but that's not true because we have the Saponi, the Occaneechi Saponi, et cetera, in North Carolina, they're state recognized, et cetera. We know that was not true, okay? But what he did, he combined the Saponi and Occaneechi at Fort Christiana, and he recorded them as one tribe, Saponi. A little bit of history on that in case you're not aware of it.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you a couple of things here, if I could, please. This is an exciting book that he did his thesis on. Can you see that? Can you see the skeletal remains here? Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. 132 graves were excavated. Okay. And like I said, their bones were laying in shoebox at the Smithsonian, and we're in the process now of trying to get those back. Okay. I just want to show you some pottery, if I could, please. Okay. And let me look at this. You can see some of the designs on it. Okay, and that's how we identify Iroquois pottery. Normally it's a corn husk, normally it's string, okay?
Mhm.
That piece there, that pottery shard. Okay, so going back to the history of the Cherokee Nottoway Indian tribe, I was kind of curious whether or not at the Wade site, but you say you only found 3 post holes, right?
No, sir.
You
I only
found-
have 3 of I only have 3 of those large stone line post features. I have an abundance of post holes across the site. Most of those are small, between say 4 inches in diameter and perhaps 10 inches in diameter. But these are a different animal on a whole nother order of magnitude that we
Right.
do have parallels to, for instance, at Town Creek and some other sites in the southeast.
Right.
But no, I do have an abundance of post features at the site.
Yeah. Were you able to identify via the post holes, the shape and the size of a village?
I have the
It's scattered-
outline of
it's
the
scattered
village.
out. I'm sorry?
I said I have the outline of the village, but unlike a number of Dan River sites, the Wade site does not have a palisade around it. And my hypothesis is that it doesn't have a palisade because it's on an island, and that the water is providing the defense that a palisade might have provided.
Okay. And you'd also, well, it could have been numerous campsites too, okay?
Yep.
Also, you had mentioned the fish hooks and stuff. And
Yes,
on
sir.
an
Yes,
island
sir.
with the water surrounding it, I'm quite sure they had put together fish weirs,
Yep.
like a rock weir, either through reeds where they actually collect the fish. Because here
Yeah,
in
we
Southampton
did.
County on the Nottoway River, when the tide is low, you
Mhm.
can actually see a rock weir that my people created, I mean, eons ago.
Yeah,
collect the fish.
the one channel that's no longer there, that is it's essentially a drainage ditch in the field. We did ground penetrating radar and magnetometry last April, and we
Right.
have some features down about 2 meters in the sediment that we think might be remnants of a fish weir.
Right. So you didn't find any human skeletal remains yet?
Yes, sir, we have found human skeletal remains, but we have examined them in situ and left them where they lay.
Yeah, that's the new law now. You must leave them where they lay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, back in 65, 66, and 69, there wasn't a law. That's why they were removed. I
I
might
would
also
say-
add,
I would say that the relationship that I've been able to develop with Chief Martin and the Saponi Indians has been based on one of mutual respect and listening to what they have to say and respecting their wishes.
yeah, that's good. I might also add, speaking of an island, okay, in 1831, Raccoon Swamp Island in Sussex County off of Peters Bridge Road was identified as a Native American burial ground for chief men. Matter of fact, I got the map because the road that was created going to that island was to be there forever for the Cherokee Nottoway Indians to walk and actually cross over to the island. Okay, it went from Raccoon Island in 1731 to Ransom Island. That's what it's called now. Ransom Island is across the street from Antioch Baptist Church in Sussex County. And I had met with Adelaide Harp when we did her genealogy and realized that she had the link to the Cherokee Nottoway Indian tribe, and she invited me to her house. They had 700 acres of land on Peters Bridge Road, and there were about 5 or 6 ponds that her husband, George Harp, had dug. He was a World War II veteran. And she actually gave me the maps, the old maps of where Raccoon Swamp Island was located and the path that led to that. And I had met her about 2 years before that at a presentation that I did in Sussex County. And I was talking about that, and she got teary-eyed. She was an elderly lady, and I asked, I said, "You okay, ma'am?" She said, "I thought those were stories. My grandfather used to tell me how the bones used to wash up whenever the island flooded, you know?" So we chatted and went over to her house and got to know her real good, and found out that that her grandfather actually had a bloodline link to the Cherokee Nottoway Indian tribe. But it's amazing that archaeology, and I agree with you 100%, it tells the story. It brings history to life, okay? That's what it
Yes, sir.
does. It brings it to
Yes, sir.
life. And I'm going to show you a point here. You can see a serrate at the end on both sides. Can you see that?
So there's a question on the chat.
Okay.
Can you see that point there?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
That's a pristine point. Can you see this? The lithics on this point here? That was actually a scraper and a knife. Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So these things were found on our tribal land. And like I said, we have about 3,500 pieces of artifacts to include points, pottery shards, dating back 10, 12,000 years. And I'm just so happy. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm glad you're doing that, because that tells the story. That tells the story of indigenous people here in Virginia, okay? And
Yes,
more
sir.
that needs to be done.
It looks like we have a question that's come in through Zoom for you. The
Okay.
question is, how was your tribe able to keep your records intact when so many tribes were unable to?
It's intact based on the executive journals of the Colonial Council of Virginia, 1680 to 1775, 6 volumes. You can go to the Library of Virginia and you can make copies of those, okay? 20
Sure.
years ago, this I made copies of everything that referred to Cherry-Hunkanotaway. Then I went back over a period of about 3 years that I was at Fort Lee and actually read every volume, okay?
Mhm.
And on top of that, I had mentioned earlier about the census that was done in 1808, which is recorded, listing colonial names for my people. I also mentioned the census, the Free Negro Mulatto census of 1819, 1820, and 1821. And on those particular censuses, it had a column, whose land are you living on? And everywhere it said living on the Indian land, I knew they were Native Americans, okay? Because that's the way the colonials recorded them. So our history is richly recorded. It's about 95% recorded in the annals of colonial history. If you read the book by Albert Galante, he talks about the Cherry-Hunkanotaway Indian tribe, talks about the true name being Cherowinhaka, okay? I mean, I didn't write it, he wrote it. If you read the papers of Schoolcraft, he mentions that. Lewis Benford, that wrote the history of the Cherowinhaka-Nottoway, Maharan, and the Whanoak, also mentions that. I mean, all of the writings are out there. It's just a matter of having access to it and reading it and recording it mentally and writing it down. That's how I was able to put together in my research the ethnohistoric snapshot of the Cherowinhaka-Nottoway Indian tribe, which is on our website from 700 AD forward in short sentences. That is actually the format for the bullet that I'm writing, okay?
Okay.
Based on
A question that I had for you
I'm
is,
sorry?
yes, sir. A question I had for you was, if we look at the past 20 years, the political and social developments have really seemed to be going in the direction of Native Americans getting greater voice. And I would be curious to know what you think are the next developments, say, looking forward the next 20 years to enhancing Native American voices.
Okay. First of all, we got to tell our story, but I want to share this with you. In the last 20 years, before I got involved with the Department of Education in 2002, there was nothing about the Iroquois speakers in the educational history books. It was all Pocahontas and Powhatan. I ran that gauntlet with them. I've read their 8-year program that they do every year, not every year, every 8 years, 8 to 10 years for the SOLs, and finally got them to start listing Iroquois, Algonquin, and Siouan. Before it was just Algonquin of the Powhatan Confederation, okay? That's what it was. And let me share this with you. Not only is the history becoming more vivid now, but they also are negating out Native American history. That's what they're doing. And I give you an idea. They're claiming that everything pertaining to Native American is prejudice, okay? Which is not true. Prejudice, bias, and racial. I'm a member of the Native American Guarding Association, okay? We pushed real hard for the name Redskin because Redskin is the color that we painted ourselves whenever we went to war. But they made that out to be a prejudice, derogatory name. A survey was done where 90% of Native Americans said they had no problem with that name. On the reservated Indians out west, their suicide rate, their alcoholic rate dropped because of the Redskin name. As soon as they got rid of that name, now we had a high ebb of suicide, of alcoholism, etc. Okay, on the reservated tribes. So they're negating out our history. They're negating it out. I'll give you another example. I had a meeting 2 years ago with the Department of Interior, okay, pertaining to the tests to become a citizenship here in South Africa, become a citizenship in the United States of America. The tests that immigrants have to take. Do you realize there's not one question pertaining to indigenous Americans on that test? We were here first. So I challenged them with that, and I also shared this, that Thomas Jefferson and the other founders of the Constitution used the 117 articles of the Iroquois Treaty of Peace, 1442, that Hiawatha went around to the 6 civilized nations and brought that peace accord together. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin used that for the framework of the Constitution. In 1988, there was a resolution that was printed and authorized by Congress to honor the Iroquois Treaty of Peace as it was used for the building of the Constitution of this country. Did you think that's in the history books? No, it is not. Is that on the immigration test for citizenship? No, it's not. So they're still negating out history of indigenous people here in the United States, especially here in Virginia. And people need to realize that. If you don't know the history, you can't fight it. I know the history. I live the history. I walk the history. I walked it around my dinner table and my supper table. I call it supper, with my mom and my dad sharing it with me. My mom would get mad at me and she would say, "Get your Wakatanta." That's a bad word, get you, but you got to get your butt here quick because you're going to get a stinging. Okay? So negating is going on. And we got to stop that, because eventually 100 years from now, there would be nothing about Native Americans. Everything would be amalgamation. Okay? And that's what William Byrd II of Westover and Provisional Lieutenant Governor Alexander Spotswood was all about. To get rid of the Native American people through amalgamation, through intermarriage of other races, or cohabitation. This is actually written in their writings, okay? So, but I am so glad that you're involved with archaeology, because that tells the story, that brings history to life. And people don't understand that, you know? And I don't care who is doing it, but if you're a certified archaeologist and you're doing test digs and you're finding artifacts, you're bringing history to life. And that's what we need. We need more of that, to let people throughout the United States, especially here in the state of Virginia, know that we are here and that we have always been here. So you need to recognize us as to who we are. Do you realize that we're the only ethnicity in Virginia that actually has to prove who you are? Has to prove who you're Indian? If I look at you and say, "Prove to me you're white." If I look at you and say, "You're black," you prove to me you're black. No other ethnicity is approached with that question. Only indigenous Americans, even through the BIA for federal recognition. You got to do a genealogy to show that you're Indian, okay? It's crazy. I mean, it's downright crazy, and it's biased and it's prejudicial. And I've been sharing this story for more than 500,000 people that I give presentations to since 2002, okay? To include 3 television documentaries that I've done. But people, it needs to be made known. The history needs to be there. It needs to be pushed forward, and Native people need to get involved and write their history, because they know the walk that they live. Colonials don't know. They know the walk that they live, so they need to start writing their history, okay? But there are a lot of things out there that are not coming to fruition, that are not coming to light, so people would know that Native people were first here and we were deeply involved in the building of this country. I'm not talking about the Pilgrims when they first came here for Thanksgiving, when they killed hundreds of Native people when they got here. I'm not talking about that, okay? A lot of people are not aware of that. And we celebrate Thanksgiving, but a lot of havoc happened during that Thanksgiving when they first got here. So, but anyway, I want to just personally thank you for that presentation and what you're doing at the Wade site, because you're bringing history to life. And I have to just laud you for that and give you all kinds of kudos. And I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
What questions do we have from folks here? Whatever, jump in at once.
We got one question in the back. So Chief Brown, the question is, how did you become chief of your tribe?
Well, first of all, I have a genealogical line back to a former chief. We at the Cherokee Indian tribe as Iroquois, we elected chief for life, okay? So since I go back to my 5th foster great grandmother, who was Edith Turner, Wale Runsara, because she raised my 4th great grandmother, whose colonial name was given to her by the census in 1808 as Polly Woodson, but her actual name was Carol Hoot. She married Harrison Turner, who was also Native. They went to Artisttown, which was 2.5 miles in the back of the woods, which was right across Bean Creek from my grandfather's farm. I grew up on a 750-acre farm that my grandfather came out of Artisttown, and he bought for 25 cents an acre. He was born in 1875, okay? And he bought it for 25 cents an acre. It's a century farm there, because it's been in the family for more than 125 years. So my bloodline link goes back to an ethno-historic Cherokee Nottoway Indian who was a former chief, okay? So in 2002, we reorganized the ethno-historic Cherokee Nottoway Indian tribe. We did not create a new tribe based on clusters of indigenous American families that were here in Southampton County. We met at a Chickahominy powwow. There were like 36 of us. And at that time, I was elected as the spokesperson for the tribe, which is basically the chief. And then in 2002, March, I was elected as the chief, okay? And then as we were perusing the history and learning more of the history in reference to the Iroquois culture and traditions, I was elected again in 2006 for life as an Iroquois chief. So that's how I was elected chief of the tribe. And I've actually been the chief since 2002. We have 425 tribal members that can do a paper trail back to ethno-historic Cherokee Nottoway Indian surname. All of them are not patrilineal or matrilineal like I am. I am mother's side and father's side. Some of them address father's side, others address mother's side, okay? But our constitution and bylaws has it set up that way, that if you can do a paper trail and show that you have a connection, then the council can look at your genealogy and vote you in to be a tribal member. Of course, we got 425 tribal members, but as you know, in any entity, the work of the many is always done by the work of the few. You know that, okay? But we're excited. We're looking forward to our 28 Intertribal Corn Harvest Powwow on November the 2nd and the 7th, and our school day on November the 5th. So we extended the invitation and hope you can come. I hope I answered that question of how I was elected chief of the Cherokee Nottoway Indian tribe of Southampton County, Virginia. And thanks for I see another hand back there.
Yes, sir. Oh, she was giving you a thumbs up. You answered her question.
Oh, good, outstanding.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for talking to us tonight. My question is about, I'm really fascinated with your political and your military service on top of your, your status as a chief. And I'm curious how you reconcile some of the conflicts you talk about with indigenous populations and, the federal or the state governments, and how you sort of navigate the differences, the different parts of your identity and the different, how people in your tribe do the same thing. Because it seems like there's a lot of pushing and pulling of identity there that must be difficult to navigate sometimes.
That question for me?
Yes, sir.
No, there is really no pushing or pulling in reference to people identifying themselves as a Cherokee Nottoway Indian bloodline. If you don't, then you just don't come in the tribe. We have a lot of people that call and say, hey, I'm a member of the Cherokee Nottoway Indian tribe. I want to join the tribe now. I said, it doesn't work that way. We have a genealogist that's certified out of Boston University that does the genealogy, okay?
I think that what she was asking was, you have had a number of different roles in your life in public service
okay.
and military service. And how do you reconcile those different roles in your life with the different tensions that come out of those roles as well?
Okay, good. Well, as you're aware, I did 28 years in the military, one war too many, jumped out of too many good airplanes with the paratrooper, kind of messed my right knee up on my 77 jump. But there are a lot of leadership skills that are acquired in the military, okay? And you work with a lot of different populations, a lot of ethnicities, and you have to learn to deal with people. And you have to be a good gauge of people also. But you have to get people to realize, from my leadership style, that you're doing this because you believe you want to do it, okay? You can't force people to do things, okay? You have to motivate them, but you have to motivate them in such a way that they believe that this is my idea, so I can do it, okay? And that's the way we run our tribal council, and that's the way we run our Cherokee Nottoway Indian Heritage Foundation, which is the 501c3 tax exempt entity of the arm of the tribe. And matter of fact, all of our donations and money comes in through the Cherokee Nottoway Indian tribe. That's how we purchased $690,000 in real estate, and put up the excavated tribal land, powwow grounds, created the walking trails, created 3 28-foot deep ponds that we stocked with 28 large bass and 200 bluegill. But it's all about leadership. You cannot be a demanding and overbearing leader, okay? You have to listen to your people with an attentive ear, okay? But we let our people know that we listen, we take your recommendations, we discuss it, but when the decision is made, then we expect you to get on board with it. The same thing in the military, I mean, sometimes the general puts forth an order, you might not like it, you discuss it or whatever, but when that order is finalized, you got to follow it. If he tells you to take this hill, you got to take it. You can't turn around and say, well, why should I take this hill? So it's all about leadership. And like I said, I've had a lot of leadership roles since I retired from the military. On the South African County Board of Supervisors for 8 years. I was on the STOP program. I was also involved in grant writing. I write grants, and we did quite a few grants to help us get the land. Also, matter of fact, the last 165 acres, I networked the Department of Historical Resources and decided to put that 165 acres in a conservation easement, so the tribe could never ever sell it. You follow me? That means Chernhaka Nottoway Indian tribe will have it perpetuity. So I did that, and on 120 acres, we planted 64,000 longleaf pines, which was indigenous to this country before the colonials came here and cut them all down. We got a total of 90,000 longleaf pines planted on the tribal land. On the first 100 acres we did on the first 80 acres rather, we did 20,000 acres. They're about 15 years old now. So this is money that will come into the tribe, 15, 25 years from now, that they can use for education for their kids, etc. So it's always a plan that you have to look forward. And the thing is, you have to be able to share that vision, okay? And I'm a visionarian. Sometimes people don't accept your vision, but eventually, if they see where it's going, they'll get on board with it, okay? But you cannot force it down their throat, okay? So our vision has been great since 2002. And I have to share this. It's all about favor from the Creator. In 2002, this is a true story, I walked that first 100 acres for 7 consecutive years, claiming it in the name of the Creator. 7 years later, John Goode, Goode, international paper called me and said, Walter, I understand you're interested in this land. I said, most certainly am. I said, what do you want for it? He met with me at Huddle House. I do a lot of business in the Coney and Huddle House over tea. I'm a tea drinker. I'm a hot tea drinker with cream and with lemon and honey, okay? I guess there's some of the English coming out of me on my mother's side. I don't know. But anyway, so I met with him and he said, well, we want $135,000 for it. I said, can I get a timber cruiser to go out there because they had 25-year-old loblolly pines, right? He said, yes. So I got Keith Turner, a friend of mine, when I cruise the timber. And he said the timber is worth about $95,000, $96,000. So I called Paul Verber, who I knew was a friend of mine, who's a lawyer in North Carolina. I knew he was interested in the property. So I met him before I closed the deal. I said, Paul, I know you want this 100 acres for this 25-year-old loblolly pines. We're only going to sell 80 acres of it. You need to make me an offer. First offer he made was $95,000. I said, that's not enough. He said, give me a couple of weeks and I'll come back and talk to you again. He came back and offered me $105,000. So I shook his hand. And as soon as we closed that deal with International Paper at $135,000, Paul Verber met me and gave the tribe the Chernhaka Nottoway Indian Heritage Foundation, which was tax exempt for him, a check for $105,000. We did the same thing. We did the same thing for the last 165 acres. I walked it for 7 years. We tried to get them International Paper, but they sold it in bulk, some 2,000 acres to Southern State Timber. Southern State Timber called me and said, okay, Chief Brown, I understand you're interested in this piece of land that adjoins 100 acres. I said, okay, what do you want for it? He said, we want $1 million. No, that's too much. So he took it back to the Creator, and a year later, he sold it to TimberVest. And as soon as TimberVest got it in Atlanta, Georgia, they called me and said, Chief Brown, I understand you want this particular property. We just bought it. We have not filed the deed yet. Do you mind if we call it the Chero-N-Haka tract? Did you hear what I just said? Do you mind if we call it the Chero-N-Haka tract? Now tell me that wasn't an omen. So at first we offered $300,000, but they wanted to keep the timber. But we couldn't afford that because we wanted the land to sell the timber to pay off the note, right? That's one thing my grandfather told me when I was 8 years old. He sat me on his knee. He said, son, you only had a third grade education. And he spoke in broken English. He said, son, I want you to make something out of yourself. Never buy land unless you got some timber on it because you can sell the timber to pay the bill. I said, yes, sir. I never forgot that. Okay. So anyway, TimberVest said, okay, we'll take $300,000. We're going to keep the timber. I said, no. I said, what would you take if we keep the timber? he said, we'll take 500,000. So I went back to the tribal council and the board of directors and talked to them about it. We got back with them, they said, well, we want 550,000 because there's been growth out there. Okay. I went to the Department of Historical Resources and chatted with them and wrote a grant for $281,000, but ended up at 271. So they're still putting me short. So I went to BB&T Bank, gave them the timber cruise report, which showed the timber was worth 196,000, and guaranteed to them that once we closed the deal, we would pay $265,000 back to the $285,000 note, which would leave us $20,000 to pay off in 3 years. I signed the paper on my signature. They agreed to it. I gave it to my friend Dan Crumpler, who was our attorney. He said, Walt, how in the world you getting all this money and you don't have no lien on the property? I said, Dan, don't worry about that. Let's cut the contract for me, okay? So I met with Paul Verba, and he offered me $297,000. I said, it's not enough again. He said, give me a couple of weeks. He went back and talked to his business partner and came back. He said, will you take 300,000? I said, no. He said, what about 305? I stuck my hand out and shook it real quick. The day that we closed, he bought us a cashier's check for $305,000 and had not cut one stick of timber. We immediately went to BB&T Bank, paid them $265,000 and let the note for $20,000, and we paid the note off in 2 years. Tribal people did, doing $100 a year in the tribe. And so now we got 263 acres of tribal land, free and simple. We don't owe anybody any money. Now tell me that's not a vision. That is a vision that we got from the Creator, and the Creator worked with us on that. And we thank him for that. We really do. We thank him and we praise him every day. So I'm excited. There are other great things that he's going to do for us also, like federal recognition, because we deserve it. We really do. And our history documents it, that we deserve it. But anyway,
Please join me in thanking Chief Brown and Dr. Bates for their great speeches and presentations. Thank you both.
we get a
It's been
copy of the
a wonderful evening, and we hope to do this again soon. On your way out, don't forget, we have lots of great snacks. We've got lemonade and cookies in the hallway, and have a great evening.